On this Sunday, December 11th, we gather at Heartland Temple to celebrate the enlightenment of Shakyamuni Buddha and to express our gratitude for his life and teaching. His awakening is a constant reminder to all of us that with proper effort, we too awaken and thus manifest the truth that we are Buddha. We invite all beings throughout space and time to join us in this celebration so that we may live in peace and harmony. Let us recite the names of Buddha. Vairocana Buddha.
Page 20. The lifespan of the dust come one.
Since I attained Buddhahood, the number of kalpas that have passed is immeasurable. Hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions, trillions, asamkayas. Constantly I have preached the law of teaching, converting countless millions of living beings, causing them to enter the Buddha way. All this for immeasurable kalpas in order to save living beings. As an expedient means, I appear to enter nirvana, but in truth I do not pass into extinction. I am always here preaching the law. I am always here, but through my transcendental powers I make it so that the living beings in their befuddlement do not see me even when close by. When the multitudes see that I have passed into extinction, far and wide they offer alms to my relics. All harbor thoughts of yearning, and in their minds thirst to gaze at me. When living beings have become truly faithful, honest and upright, gentle in intent, single-mindedly desiring to see the Buddha, not extinct, at other times not, and that if there are living beings in other lands who are reverent and sincere and wish to believe, then among them too I will preach the unsurpassed law. But you have not heard of this, so you suppose that I enter extinction. When I look at living beings, I see them drowned in a sea of suffering. Therefore I do not show myself, causing them to thirst for me. Then when their minds are filled with yearning, at last I appear and preach the law for them. Such are my transcendental powers, constantly I have dwelled on Holy Eagle Peak and in various other places when living beings witness the end of a kalpa and all is consumed in a great fire. This land remains safe and tranquil, constantly filled with heavenly and human beings. The halls and pavilions in its gardens and roads are adorned with various kinds of gems. Jewel trees abound in flowers and fruit where living beings enjoy themselves at ease. The gods strike heavenly drums, constantly making many kinds of music. Mandarava blossoms rain down, scattering over the Buddha in the great assembly. My land is not destroyed, yet the multitude see it as consumed in fire with anxiety, fear, and other sufferings, filling it everywhere. These living beings with their various offenses, true causes arising from their evil actions, spend asankaya kalpas without hearing the name of the three treasures. But those who practice meritorious ways, who are gentle, peaceful, honest, and upright, all of them will see me here in person, preaching the law. At times for this multitude I describe the Buddha's lifespan as immeasurable, and to those who see the Buddha only after a long time, I explain how difficult it is to meet the Buddha. Such is the power of my wisdom, that its sagacious beams shine without measure. This lifespan of countless kalpas I gained as a result of lengthy practice. You who are possessed of wisdom, entertain no doubts on this point. Cast them off, end them forever. For the Buddha's words are true, not false. He is like a skilled physician who uses an expedient means to cure his deranged children. Though in fact alive, he gives our word he is dead. Yet no one can say he speaks falsely. I am the Father of this world, saving those who suffer and are afflicted. Because of the befuddlement of ordinary people, though I live, I give out word. I have entered extinction. For if they see me constantly, arrogance and selfishness arise in their minds. Letting me restraint, they give themselves up to the five desires and fall into the evil paths of existence. Always I am aware of which living beings practice the way and which do not, and in response to their needs for salvation, I preach various doctrines for them. At all times I think to myself, how can I cause living beings to quickly gain entry into the unsurpassed way and quickly acquire the body of a Buddha?
The body of the pure Dharma world neither appears nor disappears. The strength of a compassionate vow brings life and death into being. Revering the Buddhas, we aspire to have their true compassion shine upon us. Prostrating ourselves before Buddhas, we aspire to have their true compassion embrace us. Today, December 11th, we celebrate great teacher Shakyamuni Buddha's Enlightenment Day. We heartily offer incense, flowers, candlelight, and hot tea, and chant the lifespan of the thus come one in gratitude for his compassion. May great compassion mind penetrate deeply to all beings of the triple world and six realms of existence. May the light of Buddha's awakening eternally illuminate all beings, and may we constantly live in the spirit of the ancestral teaching. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom,
You sit first.
Or we may need to rearrange our seats.
Okay, hold on.
Call and response. The Dharma is vast and subtle.
The Dharma is vast and subtle.
We now have a chance to see this.
We now have a chance to see this.
Study this and practice this.
Study this and practice this.
May we realize this true meaning.
May we realize this true meaning.
So many things had to take place for this moment to to be. And so many of you here have made this event happen. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to do a sesshin, and somehow it happened. It wasn't, but it's not a miracle. It's the result of a lot of effort. Yeah, really. Yesterday I was saying how important it is for all of us to really at least know intellectually how important it is, everything that we do. Or not necessarily how important it is, but how much it affects everybody else. The smallest, tiniest things affect how everybody else experiences the world. And we are effectively creating the world. There's not an objective world. We think in terms of subject and object. I'm the subject, and then there's the world. And we can study the world with our instruments, and we'll get somewhere, we'll get some idea about what the world is, but when the subject is absent, that's 50% missing. And we have to also include that we're creating the world. Each one of us is creating the world through our actions, our activities. And so just to come into a sesshin, or simply to sit for a little while at the Zen Center, we're creating a little micro universe here. We're turning away from our usual habits and patterns. And those of us who have been sitting for 4 days, some of you have been sitting 4 days, I've been sitting about close to 3. You're making a big change in the ordinary patterns of your life. Once the sesshin ends, you might not notice much change though, unless you start to incorporate some of the little things of Zen practice into your life, the little things. This is a big thing, and it's very hard to maintain for more than a few days. A week is usually the max. And it's amazing if you can set aside some time to practice like we've been doing. But it's the small things that are really important to make ongoing changes. If we think we're going to make a big change by doing one sesshin, we're going to be disappointed. My teacher heard that the Dalai Lama, this was a number of years ago, and maybe some of you I'm sure have heard this, he was asked what Buddhism is, and he said something like, "My religion is kindness." And my teacher's response to that was, our religion is, in Japanese, omoiyari. Omoiyari means consideration for the needs of others. And also I would add consideration for the needs of ourself. That's the heart of practice, is thinking about what other people need. And the forms that we're employing here are the means through which to develop our kokoro, our heart and mind. If we don't have the forms, we just we enter into just a big vacuum. So we need those forms. Whether we do them correctly or not isn't the point, but we have these forms to help us develop to develop the heart. And we want to develop a strong back, right? This is upright sitting. So we develop a strong back, and you can see if you've been sitting for a while, it takes some practice, it takes some regularity. And even if you've been sitting regularly, you still might have difficulty sitting upright. But that's the aim, is upright sitting. Have a strong back and a soft front. A soft front means that we're open, we acknowledge the reality of our vulnerability, the soft spots here in the front of the body. It's open. We're one of the only creatures on the planet, animals on the planet, that can actually reveal its soft spot, because we sit upright and we can walk on 2 legs rather than 4. Isn't that, I mean, think about that for a second. Dogs and cats can't do that. And they'll only roll over if they really trust you. What other creatures? Bears can do it for a short time, squirrels for a short time, but they can't walk. But just think about all the animals, and we're the interesting creature that can actually sit upright. Our primate ancestors, they would, they had to use they didn't have arms, they had 4 legs. Right? Are these arms or legs? Arm is just a concept. We could easily replace the word arm with leg. We were 4-legged creatures too. Only difference is that we use our upper legs for grasping certain things. Right? But think about how amazing it is that, like, when we compare ourselves with other creatures, that we can actually sit upright. That's such a, I don't know, and I think about that, I just feel so much gratitude to be a human being. Right? What if we were dead? We were certainly other creatures in previous lives, the Buddhist teachings say. But even from a science perspective, our molecules have transformed over millions of years. And certainly we were part of animals and plants. And this time around, our molecules formed into a human being. The Buddha said when the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness are together in the same spot, you have a human being. And when they disintegrate, you no longer have a human being. So, wow, here we are. Right? We just somehow our molecule, it's not even ours. We think of it as, okay, this is me. We think of it, these are my molecules. Where'd you get them? Go to the store. So last couple of days, I've been focusing on the teachings just after the Buddha's enlightenment, the first teaching. And on the altar there, I brought with me one of these images of the Buddha. This is the first teaching of the Buddha, the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And it's the seminal teaching of Buddhism. 4 noble truths. This teaching, how many of you have never heard of the 4 noble truths? Raise your hand. Oh, everybody here has heard the 4 noble truths. Okay. Well, this will be a short talk then. So he preaches, actually, I don't think we know them as well as we should, though. I mean, we might get an idea, like suffering, cause, and then the path, right? That's the basics. But if we go into them a little bit deeper, we can see there's a lot for us to chew on, and that's kind of what we've been chewing on the past couple of days. One of the things the Buddha says, so the second noble truth, that's where we focused on. There is a cause of suffering, and because there is a cause, there must be an end. That's the message of Buddhism. But it's up to us. You can't just stop there. We can't just take his word for it. That's not what he's wanting for us to do. We've actually got to recognize where the individual causes are for our own lives, for each of us. They're not going to be, there may be some things that are the same for each of us, but suffering manifests differently for each of us. So recognizing what's the cause And if you can recognize the cause, that's going to get you one step closer to looking at, well, how can I end this? So it means that we need to really be somewhat serious in investigating what are the causes of my suffering. And first of all, we can even back it up. A lot of times we don't want to even recognize that we have suffering. Everything's all good, right? But if you're here, I'm going to assume you recognize suffering on some level. So the Buddha says in his first Dharma talk, he says, I have destroyed all afflictions and reached full awakening. What happened there that he went from Siddhartha Gautama, the prince, to Shakyamuni, Buddha, the enlightened one? There must have been some, here he is the prince unenlightened, and now he's the Buddha enlightened. What happened? There must have been something there. Now, when we sit Zazen, we sit as if that statement is true. I have destroyed all afflictions and reached full awakening. We sit as if that statement is true for us. That's the spirit in which we're sitting. I have destroyed all afflictions and reached full awakening. That's the words of the Buddha. What does Dogen Zenji say? Do you know in the Fukan Zazengi? I'm gonna get my Fukan Zazengi.
This is, the treasure store will open of
Well,
itself.
something like that.
Joy freedom.
No, I was thinking of something else.
Will I travel around with the dust again?
Well, the first paragraph is good. The way is originally perfect and all pervading. How could it be contingent on practice and realization? That's one of the things he says. He says, accord with the enlightenment of all the Buddhas. Just hold on to that, but my understanding is that we sit as Buddhas when we sit zazen. We're not practicing like the Buddha practiced. It's a different kind of practice. We see in the sutras, the Buddha went from an unenlightened being to an enlightened being. And for us, we start out with enlightenment. Now, I say that, and we all have to be very, very careful here. Because if you think that you're enlightened, right, that's not it either. And maybe I'll talk a lot more about that next talk, but Buddha, if we look at the sutras, Buddha had several steps between unenlightened and enlightened. And how could that be different for us? If Zazen is upright sitting and a moment, this is Soto Zen, a moment of sitting is a moment of enlightenment, is a moment of Buddha. But how could it be different for us? Does that mean we don't have to investigate the causes of suffering, that we're already there? And Dogen says, consider the Buddha and his 6 years of upright sitting. Consider the Buddha and his 6 years of upright sitting. If the sages of old had to make effort, shouldn't we have to do that? But yet we have this other teaching that says, sit zazen and you're already Buddha. We have to be very careful. We can delude ourselves into thinking we don't have to investigate the causes of our own suffering. We just sit, right? But there's a somewhat a different orientation where we still need to practice. That's Dogen's teaching. We still need to practice. Practice and enlightenment are one. Shusho ichino. Practice and enlightenment are one. But it's a different orientation to earlier Buddhist teachings. In early Buddhism, you have a worldview that says that you can attain enlightenment over many, many lifetimes. That was what the Buddha proclaimed confidently. And you see that in the Lotus Sutra, which we just chanted. He proclaims this really confidently. The disciples weren't sure, am I going to get to be a Buddha someday? And the Buddha in the Lotus Sutra makes all these predictions for his disciples and beyond. And basically all of us are predicted to attain enlightenment. But the idea is that you'll be attaining enlightenment some point in the far off distant future. In Mahayana Buddhism, which is what Zen is embedded in, Buddhism transitions from the Indian worldview that sees life as reincarnation after reincarnation after reincarnation. It goes into a different country, China, where there's not the same idea of reincarnation. That's not central. And there's also a very, if it is even existent, and the Chinese mentality is very practical. It's very practical oriented. It's about the here and now. Is this going to be useful or is it not? It's kind of like American society. Is it good or is it not good? Is it going to help me out right here and now or is it not? And so this other teaching starts to emerge that you can attain enlightenment suddenly, immediately. You don't have to wait lifetime after lifetime. And yet, you still have to practice. It's not like you do it and then you can get up and go and proclaim your enlightenment. That's not it either. So I had a Sangha member in Iowa ask me about these stages of practice. He was reading a sutra called the Samanya Phala Sutta, the fruit of the contemplative life, the fruits of the contemplative life. He was reading it on his own, and in this early sutta of the Buddha, it lists all of these different fruits of practice, particularly for a monk. And it also includes in there these various jhanas. It's a very long sutra. I'm ashamed to say I didn't read the whole thing, but I kind of read through chunks of it and found it really interesting and helpful. But it could also be fairly confusing for somebody who's even doesn't know a lot about the different forms of Buddhism and how it's changed over time from the early teachings of the Buddha to Mahayana, the Mahayana attitude towards Buddhism. And so this Sangha member said, well, these various jhanas, these various stages, these various states of mind, it talks about them in this sutta. Where is it in the Zen teachings? So I thought, oh, this is a very good question. Let's investigate this. What is in the sutra? I never studied this sutra before, so let's check it out and see what we can find out. So what I share with you is just my ruminations on studying the sutra and my understanding of Zazen based on Dogen. The Samanya Phala Sutta is about a wicked king, King Ajatasattu. Does anybody know who that one is? Anybody heard of him? Nobody's heard of him. Great. Okay, so we can go into this one a little bit.
He's on Game of Thrones, right?
What's that?
Game of Thrones character?
No.
Okay.
How about King Bimbisara? Have you heard of him?
I've heard that name.
Have you heard that name? He was one of the supporters of the Buddha. Now remember, if we look at the story of the Buddha, it's just fascinating. He's a prince slated to be the king of what is it, Magadha? And there's other kingdoms around. They're just little fiefdoms. They're small. It's not like a nation state. It's a small area in northern India. And there were probably many of these little fiefdoms. But he was a prince slated to be the next king of the small fiefdom where his father proclaimed to protect that land. And neighboring was another fiefdom. And here's this King Bimbisara, and he is fascinated by this person. He knows him. He must have known him as Siddhartha, the little kid that used to play in the neighbor's yard or something like that, right? He must have known that this was a prince, and he made this radical change, this radical shift in caste. You don't easily move out of a caste. He was in the warrior, the Kshatriya caste, a warrior. You don't make a shift out of there so easily, even today. And he becomes a enlightened one. He leaves the palace. He leaves his family behind. And so King Bimbisara had this great respect, and he was a student of the Buddha. He wanted to learn from him, and they must have had a very interesting relationship. The Buddha, of course, knew that. He saw himself as, if not, well, I don't think he had any problem in dealing with a ruler, because he knew that life. Whereas if the president walked in the room and here, we might feel this major shift in energy, a hierarchy, like, whoa, that's the president. But coming from the perspective of the Buddha, who was already immersed in the life of a king and knew what that was about, he sees the king and he's like, I know what your life is like. That's not what I want to do. And he chooses not to. So they develop this friendship. Well, King Bimbisara has a son named Ajatasattu, and Ajatasattu is hungry for power. And he's so hungry, he does a terrible thing. He kills his father.
Oh, that guy.
That guy. No. Yeah. And if we think about the relationship between the Buddha and King Bimbisara, we must wonder, like, how did that affect the Buddha? Because King Bimbisara was a supporter of the Buddha and his Sangha, provided land, food at times, welcomed the Buddha and his Sangha. How must have it felt for the Buddha to hear the words come to him that King Bimbisara was not only dead, but he was murdered by his son yet. Moreover, Ajatasattu was a supporter of Devadatta. Now, who knows Devadatta?
Oh, that guy.
Devadatta was also a Sangha member. He was a monk. And he was one of the cousins of the Buddha. But he tried to split the Buddha's Sangha apart, and he succeeded for a time. He split the Sangha of the Buddha. This is happening in the lifetime of the Buddha. So the Buddha witnesses his cousin betray him, pull away loads of the Sangha. Devadatta apparently was wanting the Sangha to live a more strict life, and he thought the Buddha was too easy. So he on those terms, he pulls away a bunch of Sangha, a bunch of monks. And he's supported then by King Ajatasattu in this. I mean, the Buddha loses the support of a major donor, and now his son is supporting the Sangha member that is his cousin that betrayed him. That must have been such a huge blow for the Sangha. So this sutra comes in right at that point where you cannot kill somebody without having some major mental distress. And King Ajatasattu goes to the Buddha in this story. He goes to seek out the Buddha for his wisdom. And he begins to ask the Buddha. Can you imagine the Buddha is now confronted with Ajatasattu, the person who killed his good friend King Bimbisara, as well as helped to divide the Sangha. Now he's confronted with King Ajatasattu, who wants some mercy from the Buddha. He wants to hear the teachings of the Buddha. And the Buddha very patiently and calmly, we presume, responds to King Ajatasattu's request, because you don't begrudge anybody the Dharma if they ask, even if they've hurt you. So what are the fruits of the contemplative life? He mentions several fruits. I'm just going to mention a few of what he mentions. He says, you're no longer a slave. You're free. A monk or nun receives everything she or he needs, not more or not less. So you're not burdened by material possessions. The third now is mindfulness, contentment, the ability to restrain the senses. Now we get into some mental fruits. The ability to cultivate virtue. In other words, being able to know what the precepts are and to put them into practice. And that's what we're doing when we sit upright in Zazen. We say that Zazen and the precepts are one. When we sit upright, it does. When you're in pain, who wants to sit upright? Raise your hand. And especially when your back's bothering, like lifting it, pressing your sternum forward, opening your ribs. I know for me, the sesshin has been really helpful to, I enjoy sitting in silence, and then to open the heart in a situation like this where there's a supportive container of people is so nourishing, because it's not easy for me, or probably any of us, to feel vulnerable, in the vulnerability that comes with sitting upright. That's not easy to allow ourselves to experience, but that's what we're giving ourselves that gift. Like, oh, wait a minute, that's my true nature. I have vulnerability here. I'm exposing my heart, literally, but also figuratively. My heart's being exposed. It's open to attack, and we might feel some sensitivity around this area. Like, I don't want to. There's this is what we do in life. We do this, and to protect ourselves. And Zazen says, do this, sit upright. Right? Look at the ways that you are experiencing suffering. We really start to notice that first noble truth of suffering when we sit upright. We say, oh, wait a minute. And that's why people ask inevitably, am I doing something wrong? When they first come to Zazen, am I doing something wrong? Are you experiencing suffering? Well, if you are, then you might be doing it correctly. That's the first noble truth. Why don't, instead of wondering whether you're doing it right or wrong, look at the way that, notice that there's suffering, and then you can start to investigate. Oh, there's some causes to this. What might be the causes? What might be the causes to the suffering? And the Buddha gives us a lot of ideas there, what might cause it. So sitting upright is keeping these precepts. The Buddha also mentions abandoning covetousness, ill will, drowsiness, anxiety. Boy, today's been a hard day. I don't know about you guys. Drowsiness. We're just like, I slept terrible last night, and now I'm trying to. All right, how do I do this? What do I do again? Oh yeah, I'm supposed to wake up. You know? And then that's, I feel something there. I'm trying to wake up. I want to go to sleep. Oh, wake up. Okay. And just be with that. That's difficult. It's counterintuitive. He talks about, this is an interesting one, stilling directed thought. A lot of times when we come to meditation, actually what we're doing is directing our thought. That's what we do throughout our waking life. Outside of meditation, we're constantly directing our thought. We string together logical ideas and we create our world. We create the world with logic. And here's the Buddha says one of the fruits of practice is stilling directed thought. That's an interesting way. I hadn't heard it like that. Stilling directed. In other words, putting an end to directed thought. This is so counterintuitive for us because logic is what we rely on so heavily. And then there's the cultivation of pleasure, rapture, joy, equanimity, mindfulness. So I looked up these 4 jhanas. It was hard to tease them out of the sutra because it's not written in that way, but here they are. Here's the modus operandi of these 4 jhanas. When we detach ourselves from the sensory world, the world of the senses, right? Eyes, we let go of the eyes, the ears less so, but certainly the eyes, the images are input through the eyes is really big. And we do that by lowering our eyes. But when we detach from the sensory world, there's the experience of joy and ease. That's the first jhana, joy and ease. The second is when we abandon, here it is again, applied and sustained thought. When we abandon applied and sustained thought. So applied thought means we intentionally think about a particular thing, and then we sustain it over multiple mind moments. When we abandon that kind of thinking, it's not saying don't have thoughts. And so that's one of the things we experience. It's especially in a sesshin, we get the opportunity to really experience how tightly we cling to applied thought and sustained thought. We really cling tightly to that. It's hard for us to let go of that mode of thinking. When we do that, when we let go of that mode, we experience rapture. That's the second jhana. The third jhana, in abandoning rapture, there is the experience of subtle happiness and one-pointedness. Maybe some of you have experienced a little bit of that. Subtle happiness and maybe one-pointedness. The concentration level increases. And then the fourth jhana, with the abandoning of happiness, that's a hard one for us to grasp because at the root of our government we say the pursuit of happiness, right? So this might be also another counterintuitive one. Through the abandoning of happiness, there's the development of one-pointedness and equanimity. There's a book out called Ending the Pursuit of Happiness. Might be worth giving a read to. I haven't read it myself, but it's got a nice name to it. And right, there's nothing, we in our culture, we're so conditioned to thinking that we're supposed to be happy. No, there's nothing wrong with that either. So now we get to Zen, which takes place another at least 700-800 years after the Buddha, and then maybe we can jump forward about 1500 years or so, and the way that Buddhism is presented, it starts to change a little bit. So I want to read from the Transmission of Light. Right? These are the enlightenment stories of the various ancestors that we chant, whose names we chant. Okay, so there's these, keep in mind, there's these jhanas, these stages. So this Sangha member wanted to know, like, where are these stages in our practice? Don't we do this? He's looking at this, and what's happening there? What do you see happening? Somebody looks at these stages and wants them.
Attachment.
Attachment, yeah, grasping, attainment. Somebody, right? It's if you've been sitting for a while, you can see it pretty quickly. Yeah, there it is. There's the time. So here's how we work with this. This is from the 35th chapter of Transmission of Light, translated by Thomas Cleary. Qing Yuan went to study with the Zen master Hui Ning and asked, "What work is to be done so as not to fall into stages?" Right, so, but even if we know intellectually we're not supposed to grasp after states, we still do. We do, whether we do that. We're looking like, when is it going to change? It's got to get better than this, right? And this is really an enlightened question. What work is to be done so as not to fall into stages? This is a beautiful question. Now, in fact, I think we can just contemplate this question during Zazen. Like, what work is to be done so as not to fall into stages? Right? It's a kind of a protection for our mind. That this monk is actually asking that question. That's such a bold question. How do I not fall into stages? We do. We fall into. How do I not fall into stages? Just ask the question. Just ask the question. How do I not fall into stages? There's freedom in asking that question. It's tremendous freedom. How do I not fall into stages? The Zen master inquired, "What have you done?" And Qing Yuan said, "I do not even practice the holy truths." That's the Four Noble Truths, right? I don't even practice those. The Zen master said, "What stage do you fall into?" Qing Yuan said, "If I do not even practice the holy truths, what stages are there?" And the Zen master recognized his profound capacity. Meanwhile, we still have this mind to work with that wants to grasp things. So I went through just kind of thinking about, well, how do we? So this is one way we think about these stages, but we have other ways as well. And if we look at the Fukan Zazengi, Dogen does give us some pointers there, like how to do Zazen. He does set us up as, if you want this, then get to work at it. If you want to be a Buddha, then you've got to put some effort into it. He says this. So I think one way to think about this is that Zen brings in or ushers in addition to some of these formula, it ushers in a lot of rich imagery. The early sutras do as well, but Zen really brings in, if you look at Zen sayings, there's a lot of imagery there. So for example, the dragon attaining the water. What does that mean? Or the tiger taking to the mountain. This may be one way of thinking about ending directed thought. The that dragon enters the water. Like, if we don't understand the mythology or the symbol of the dragon, we might have difficulty with this. But I remember Nonan saying that the home of the dragon is the water. And the dragon is this powerful, immense, powerful beast, and the symbol of enlightenment for us. So Dogen Zenji says that Zazen is, he equates it with the dragon attaining the water. So he gives us an image. The Buddha in the sutta doesn't give us this kind of image. He says, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this. And it's almost bare of images, although he does have some stories there. So fixing our mind on one thing is a mistake in our practice. To fix our mind on one thing, it's a mistake. We do it. Our mind does it naturally. My teacher, she would say, let yourself be babysat by Zazen. Let yourself be babysat by Zazen. Right? So we sit, and it could be excruciating, right, to allow ourselves to be babysat. That's beautiful too. It's wonderful. The Buddha also, or Dogen says, do not think good or bad. Give up the operations of mind, consciousness, and intellect. Have no designs on becoming a Buddha. These are some more images. Yes, have no designs on becoming a Buddha. The early suttas are saying you can become a Buddha. That's different than what Dogen is saying. Dogen is saying have no designs on becoming a Buddha. That's a different way of thinking. Give up the operations, but this is not, right? This is parallel. Give up the operations of mind, consciousness, and intellect. This is parallel, I think, to ending directed thought. It's like scissors cutting into it.
We're sitting at 11:35. We're scheduled for Zazen at 11:40.
Thank you for that. So the first jhana is joy and ease. And in the Fukan Zazengi, it says, put aside all attachments and end all affairs. That's how, so the first jhana is entered into, it's detachment from the sensory world. Dogen is saying, do the same thing. He says, put aside all attachments. If you want to sit Zazen, you've come here, you've put aside your attachments to come here. We all have. If you're here, you've put aside attachments. What do you experience then? Joy and ease. But if you're not conscious of what you're doing, then you'll miss the joy and ease part. Zazen is the dharma gate of joy and ease, Dogen says. Zazen is the dharma gate of joy and ease. Sometimes we're not so aware. And the second jhana is rapture. Rapture, that sounds very interesting. I want to have rapture. Sounds like a mystical experience. And if you're reading this from a text and you had little meditation experience and you come across these words like rapture, you're like, whoa, man, that is cool. I want to get into that state. Well, you might be disappointed if you try practicing meditation for any length of time or sitting sesshin. You might be experiencing rapture and be like, I hate this. You know, that could be a result. But I want to suggest to you on this, and maybe I'll close on this one, is that our practice is not developing our rational mind as much as allowing for the non-rational to emerge. It's not, it doesn't, if we're looking for it to make sense or to have some special insight, we're off base. It's not, it's watering the seeds of this non-rational. It's watering the seeds of the creative side of ourselves, right? Little kids aren't stringing thoughts together. They're just like, oh, let me get into this, and they're totally absorbed. But as adults, we get sucked into everything has to make sense. That's not the way the world is, though. And kids know it intuitively, and they just be that. As adults, we mature and we think things are supposed to make sense, and then we get disappointed when they don't. So Zazen is really asking us to wake up to that part of our brain that is not intellectual. Allow that bring your heart online, bring your heart into the practice. Detachment from emotion is not our practice. Detachment from emotion is not our practice, neither is expression of emotion. But to feel what we're feeling, actually feel it. This is the tricky part. This is where that vulnerability is, where we don't become Zen zombies. Right? The Zen zombie is the one who's detached from all emotion. We don't do that here. That's not our practice. But sometimes we see people like, oh, okay, everything's fine. That's not it, though. That's a Zen zombie. So we have to, just a warning not to be a Zen zombie. Right? Feel what you're feeling. Right? And get underneath the concepts we ascribe to those feelings. Get underneath we ascribe concepts to what we're feeling. We create a story out of what we're feeling, rather than just simply feeling the sensations before words start to emerge from that. So you feel it, feel what's there. You're human. You're a human being with feelings. We don't ignore those or try to suppress them. And this is leading us back to the first noble truth, that there is suffering. There is suffering. Wake up to that.
Do I have questions or answers?
Oh, sure, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, please. Yeah.
I guess when the thing that I come back to a lot is when we talk about right effort, because to me, just that word implies like, I don't want to say manipulation because it has like a negative connotation, but effort usually is an effort to control like something about your life. And
right.
Zazen is all about giving up,
right.
trying to control your experience. And so it almost seems, it seems like a paradox.
It is.
And,
it is.
And that's why I the first time you had said, like what your teacher had said, like let yourself be babysat by Zazen. And I kind of took that in, and for me, it was really helpful in like reorienting, like kind of like the spirit in which you sit. And but I still, subtly, even just thoughts start, and then just pure conditioning, like, oh, gotta stop that, and like, and so for me, I think that's really interesting. I think that's kind of like my edge right now, like as far as like what exactly is effort and like what exactly is control and like what,
yeah, it's good. So you're exploring that.
Yeah, and it's just so funny, like just brought it up because I'm like, oh yeah, I've been kind of thinking about it, and like, yeah.
Good, yeah, I think we should. It's a good place to explore. Yeah, Max.
You had mentioned earlier this pulling back from the sensory world mentioned in the sutta by lowering the gaze. You said eyes in particular, ears not so much. I've come across this instruction to not just lower and relax, but like widen the gaze. And we also have these practices of actively, listening to sounds, whether it's the sound of running water or the sound of the bell or whatever. So I wanted to ask about this balance between the pulling away and the engagement with the sensory world.
Oh, okay, yeah. So remember the four nutriments. The second one is sensory impression, and it's really a admonition about engaging with the world that we're usually engaged in, and giving us permission to do what exactly you just said. So widening the gaze is not a problem. We've already cut off the sensory world by being here. That's why I was saying that we did that. Maybe we're not clear that we've done that. We might know it, we kind of know it, but do we really know it? We've cut off the world by being in this room. You go outside that room and you get your phones and you're not cut off anymore and you're here. But for this moment, we've actively cut off the senses from the world. That doesn't mean we don't see, right? I see the house across the street, the trees. I see you all. I see what's in the periphery of my vision. But for the most part, I'm not surfing the internet. I'm not going into the city and being bombarded by advertisements. I'm not watching movies. I'm not hearing sounds that will pull us into the world. So in other words, the question is really what pulls us into feelings of unworthiness, and it's not being here. What does that is when as soon as we're exposed to the world that's trying to pull us and get our attention or get our money or one thing or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, thank you.
So you talked about how meeting the Chinese culture was different and required different paradigms shifting because of the frames of reference.
Mm-hmm.
What paradigm shifts do you think need to happen now that Zen has hit the United States?
I think actually it's got to go the other direction. That we as practitioners need to understand the culture and the religion and learn from another culture, as opposed to trying to make it fit in.
Okay.
I mean, there is that. You can look to secular Buddhist movements that try to strip away the religious elements of it, and there is some merit to that for the world of medicine and that, and for some people that will work. But I think this is a tradition that has come to the United States with great effort, and it's our responsibility, if we've gotten this far, to study where it came from, study it and study the cultures that it came from, and have a deep respect for it. So I think the United States can always work hard at appreciating other countries and cultures, and we need to keep deep respect for Asian countries. So that's how I feel about it. And there's a hurry, this feels like there's such a hurry, like, what's it gonna look like here? Well, I don't know if we're gonna know that in our lifetime, but I think right now we need to generate respect. We don't have to try to make this American. We are by just practicing it, and it's certainly different. It's different than. And that's why when I go to Japan or practice with the Japanese community in Los Angeles, it's a wonderful exchange. It's amazing to see how Buddhism is practiced by Japanese monks and nuns. It'll knock your socks off. And so we don't want to throw that out. I really feel we don't want to throw that out. There's so much to learn there. I know that some teachers might disagree, and I know Nonan was maybe a little bit felt differently about it, but yeah, there is the critique. We can also critique Buddhism. It's highly patriarchal for one thing, especially outside of the United States. But anyways, I think if we've gotten this far, we need to look and develop relationships with Buddhism's roots.
Thank you.
It's only here 100 years.
What's that?
It's only here 100 years.
It's only here 100 years, a little bit longer. Yeah. It came. That's another thing is we often ascribe Buddhism being here 100 years to, or actually 100 is good. It's a little bit longer than that, maybe 150. But with Asian immigrants, that's how it started. And in fact, I've been thinking a lot about this the past couple of years, and we really have to reform the way that we think of how Zen came to the United States. We think of it in terms of, well, Shinryu Suzuki came, and Katagiri Roshi came, and Maezumi Roshi came, and we completely ignore the fact that so many Asians brought their practices with them in the 1800s when the United States opened up for Chinese immigration. And so we've had Buddhism here on the West Coast for quite some time, but we don't give it a lot of its due credit. Anyways, thank you.
Call and response. The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road.
Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake to them all.
Dharma gates